Hello, and welcome to the Well-Read Monocle. Today we are stepping into the shadowy, dilapidated world of Thomas Ligotti. We will be conducting a complete literary tour of his celebrated collection, Teatro Grottesco. This anthology serves as a distinct bridge between corporate horror and cosmic nihilism, exploring the fragile nature of identity, the decay of reality, and the terrifying absurdity of existence. We shall be examining the narrative arc of every story in the collection, exactly as they appear in the text. So, settle in as we begin our descent into the derangements, deformations, and diseases of Mr. Ligotti's world. The collection opens with the story, Purity. The narrator, a young man named Daniel, lives with his eccentric family in a rented house. His father is obsessed with the concept of rented living and believes that ownership is a delusion. He spends his time in the basement conducting strange experiments to eliminate impurities, principally nations and deities, from the human mind. Daniel strikes up a friendship with a neighbor named Candy, a woman living in a ruined house nearby. He shows her a jar containing a presence his father siphoned from their attic, which Candy finds comforting. However, the family's eccentricities attract attention. A detective, referred to as the man in the long coat, arrives to take Daniel away, presumably to social services. Daniel attacks the detective with a poisoned needle devised by his father. Candy and her associates dispose of the detective's body in the basement of her ruined house. Returning home, Daniel finds his father's experiment has gone awry. A visitor to the house has been reduced to a greenish liquid. The story concludes with a revelation from Daniel's mother. The third great impurity, which the father had struggled to identify, is families. Next is the town manager. This tale depicts a decaying town governed by a succession of managers who invariably disappear, signaled by the extinguishing of a lamp in their office. When the current manager vanishes, the townsfolk discover the new manager has set up residence in a shed near a ruined farmhouse. The new administration is brutal. A demand appears to destroy trolley. When the trolley driver fails to stop, he is found murdered. The town is then forcibly remodeled into Funny Town, a chaotic carnival-like tourist trap where businesses are turned into absurdist installations. The hardware store becomes a maze of lavatories, and the barbershop becomes a giant playpen. Eventually, the economy of Funny Town collapses. The narrator leaves the ruined town and wanders the countryside. He meets a recruiter in a coffee shop who suggests that the narrator himself possesses the specific, hollow qualities required to become a town manager. We then move to Sideshow and other stories. This acts as a frame narrative. The narrator meets an older author in a coffee shop who insists that all existence is merely show business. The older man eventually disappears, leaving behind a manuscript of 5 short vignettes which the narrator reads. The first, The Malignant Matrix, describes a man seeking the origin of existence in a dark stairwell, only to find a crawling head and a pulsating mollusk. The second, Premature Communication, tells of a child who hears a voice whispering, "The ice is breaking up on the river." Shortly after, his parents die in an accident on a bridge. The third, The Astronomic Blur, concerns a mysterious, blurry shop that eventually infects the entire neighborhood with a primal, flickering glow. The fourth, The Abyss of Organic Forms, details a man whose brother disappears, leaving behind scraps of paper. The narrator later sees a horse possessing his brother's distinct eyes. The final vignette, The Phenomenal Frenzy, involves a man pursued by an isolated house across a landscape. The frame story concludes with the narrator finding a small, shrunken creature with the older author's eyes in an alleyway, confirming the older man's desire to escape the sideshow of existence. The next story is The Clown Puppet. The narrator works the night shift in a medicine shop. He is regularly visited by a supernatural entity, a marionette resembling a clown that floats in a reddish-gold light. The narrator considers these visitations to be outrageous nonsense. Usually, the puppet engages in absurd pantomime. However, on this night, the puppet presents a prescription pad filled with scribbles. When asked for identification, The puppet produces the passport of the shop's owner, Mr. Wisniak. The puppet then floats into the back room. Mr. Wisniak arrives, terrified, claiming intruders are upstairs. He enters the back room to use the lavatory and screams. He vanishes, presumably seeing the forces that pull the puppet's strings. The narrator remains, knowing his turn will eventually come. We proceed to the Red Tower. This narrative describes a mysterious, windowless factory standing in a desolate, grey landscape. Originally, the factory produced horrific novelty items, such as lockets containing a screaming abyss. Later, the machinery evaporated, and production moved underground to a subterranean graveyard. Here, the factory began producing hyper-organisms, birthing grotesque, vital, yet decaying creatures from the earth. The story implies that the factory has moved even deeper underground and continues to churn out nightmares, corrupting the silence of the desolate landscape. The next story is My Case for Retributive Action. The narrator, suffering from a nervous condition, takes a job processing forms for the Quine organization, a monolithic company that dominates the town across the border. He learns of a former employee named Hatcher who was driven to ruin by the company's bureaucratic cruelty and deprived of his medication. The narrator discovers Hatcher living in the attic of his lodging house. Hatcher has physically transformed into a large, spider-like creature with a human head. The narrator mercy kills Hatcher and extracts venom from his body. He uses this venom to poison the company doctor who originally sent him to this bleak town, viewing it as an act of necessary retribution. Following this is our temporary supervisor. In a metal assembly factory, the supervisor, Mr. Frowley, is called away. He is replaced by a temporary supervisor who inhabits the office, but is never clearly seen, appearing only as a shifting shadow behind frosted glass. The workers fall into a trance-like state, working endlessly without rest. One worker, Blecker, attempts to confront the entity in the office and dies shortly after from a drug overdose. The narrator attempts to resign via telephone, but hears only a terrifying roaring sound. He returns to work to find the old supervisor, Mr. Frowley, back at his desk, but changed. The factory now operates constantly, and the workers realize they can never retire, bound to the job until death. Next is a 4-part cycle titled In a Foreign Town, in a Foreign Land. The first section, His Shadow Shall Rise to a Higher House, concerns the death of a deformed recluse named Ascrobius. A stranger, Dr. Klatt, attempts to uncreate Ascrobius's grave. The town is plagued by terrors until Klatt's assistant is found dismembered and arranged to mark the empty grave. In The Bells Will Sound Forever, a commercial agent named Mr. Crumb stays at a boarding house run by Mrs. Pick. He enters the attic and hallucinates that he has become a jester puppet on a stick held by Mrs. Pick. He later learns the house burned down with all guests inside. In a Soft Voice. Whispers Nothing. The narrator observes a chaotic parade featuring a clown and a cage. He watches from his window as his former physician, Dr. Zirk, is hanged from a building across the street and dropped into the passing cage. Finally, in When You Hear the Singing, You Will Know It Is Time, the narrator discovers a leathery trapdoor in his room and hears a demonic preacher beneath the floorboards. He realizes the town is being subsumed by an other town, a demon town, and that there is no escape, only a waiting for the end. We now arrive at the title story, Teatro Grottesco. The narrator recounts the existence of an artistic underworld plagued by the arrival of the teatro, a shadowy troupe that targets artists and silences their work. The narrator, a writer, attempts to turn his work into an anti-teatro phenomenon. He collapses with an intestinal illness and wakes up in a decrepit hospital. There, he encounters Dr. Grottesque, who feeds small, squirming things to black stars floating in a glass globe. Grottesque offers the narrator a position within the organization. The narrator realizes that the teatro is not an artistic enterprise, but a disease, a fundamental, overwhelming reality that destroys the illusion of art. He is left contemplating the soft black stars that have begun to fill the sky. Next is gas station carnivals. The narrator sits in the Crimson Cabaret with a stomach ailment. An acquaintance, the art critic Stuart Quisser, approaches him. Quisser shares a childhood memory of gas station carnivals, shabby sideshows attached to rural filling stations, and a specific figure called the showman, a terrifying entity with stiff red hair who stands with his back to the audience. The narrator convinces Quisser that these memories are delusions implanted by art magic. Quisser leaves the table and vanishes. The narrator then sees the showman standing on the cabaret stage, playing a game of peekaboo, and realizes that he, too, is doomed to be claimed by this inescapable abyss. We move on to the bungalow house. The narrator discovers a performance art piece, an audio tape of a dream monologue. The voice on the tape describes a desolate bungalow house infested with vermin, evoking a sense of infinite terror and dreariness. Obsessed, the narrator tracks down the artist through a gallery owner named Dalha. He meets the artist in a library before dawn. The artist, a distant figure in a hat and coat, mocks the narrator's loneliness, telling him there is nowhere to go, nothing to do, and no one to know. Later, Dalha is found choked to death with a doll's arm. The narrator is left alone with the tapes and the artist's manuscripts, consumed by a killing sadness. The penultimate story is Severini. A group of acquaintances becomes obsessed with a hermit named Severini, who lives in a shack in a swamp. Severini undergoes physical and spiritual mutations, supposedly inspiring great art. The narrator initially avoids Severini, but is eventually invited to a gathering. He realizes that Severini and his followers are lost in a nightmare of the organism, a biological horror from which there is no escape. Instead of joining the gathering, the narrator sets fire to the shack, burning Severini and his disciples alive, though he remains haunted by the visions of the swamp. The collection concludes with the shadow, the darkness. A group of failed artists and intellectuals takes an excursion to the dead town of Crampton, led by a man named Grossvogel. Grossvogel claims to have undergone a metamorphic recovery, where his mind and self were annihilated, leaving only a body activated by a force he calls the Tsalal, the shadow, or the darkness. In a diner in Crampton, the darkness literally rises. The tourists lose their minds and egos, realizing they are merely biological puppets moved by the Tsalal. They return home as successful organisms, empty vessels thriving on the darkness. The narrator accepts that there is no self, only the body and the shadow that moves it. And that concludes our tour of Teatro Grottesco. Through these 13 stories, Thomas Ligotti presents a worldview where the self is a delusion, society is a labyrinth of bureaucratic cruelty, and the universe is a malignant, nonsensical void. It is a collection that does not offer comfort, but rather a stark, hypnotic gaze into the abyss. Thank you for joining me on the Well-Read Monocle. Until next time.